I wasn't supposed to be home that day, and perhaps that's why the careless voices drifted from my father's study like smoke through the floorboards. I had come back early from my shift at the gallery, where I'd been helping Theo reorganize his studio. Paint was still wet on my nails as I shrugged off my coat in the hallway. The house was quiet, save for the murmur of voices from the study, voices that seemed to be arguing, laced with biting remarks. My mother's sharp tone, my father's measured replies, and Livia's ringing, slightly mocking voice. "Be realistic," Livia was saying with a confidence that made her words sound like undeniable truths. "Cala's little paintings are charming, but they won't pay the bills." I froze on the stairs, gripping the banister. Their words seared my ears. Through the narrow crack in the door, I glimpsed my mother perched on the edge of my father's leather chair. Her back was tensely straight, her hands clasped tightly on her knees. She looked like a cornered animal. "The money is already set aside for her education," my mother said, though her voice faltered. "Which is why this makes sense," Livia interrupted, reclining in her seat. "My business plan is solid. The boutique will turn a profit in 6 months. Cala can go to community college like everyone else." The word struck me like a whip. My father, who normally stood by me in every disagreement, was silent. I only heard the familiar creak of his chair as he leaned back. "Your sister's venture does have merit," he finally said. My heart clenched. He was talking about merit, not my future. The rest of his sentence dissolved into white noise, and my hand instinctively brushed against the wallpaper, finding an old mark where, at 6 years old, I had drawn a tiny flower with a permanent marker. My mother had been furious, but my father had only laughed, calling it my first masterpiece. In that moment, I had felt the world was mine. It settled, then, Livia's voice pulled me from the memory. "The college fund will go to the boutique." "Livia, darling," my mother tried to protest, her voice almost pleading, "maybe we should discuss this a little more." "No, Mom, Olia is right," Livia continued, her tone radiating victorious certainty. "It's a smart investment." Those words ignited a fire within me. I pushed the door open. 3 heads turned toward me. Their expressions shifted, from surprise to embarrassment, while Livia's eyes sparkled with unmistakable triumph. "Mom and Dad keep throwing good money after bad. Heaven forbid the golden child face the consequences." The air crackled with anger. Mom's voice cracked like a whip. "Apologize to your sister." I looked at them, really looked, as if I were seeing them for the first time. Mom, with her carefully maintained facade of perfect composure, and Dad, whose stern disappointment always hid behind a mask of calm assurance. And Livia, in her natural element, pursed lips and a gaze brimming with smug satisfaction. They were exactly as they'd always been. And suddenly, I was sick of it all, the perfectly staged family portrait in which I'd never had a proper place. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "I don't think I will." I turned and left the room, ignoring their voices trailing after me like ropes that no longer held me. In the hallway, I fumbled for my phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed the number. The voice on the other end, warm and familiar, wrapped around me like a soft blanket. "Grandma, it's Cala. Can I come over? I need somewhere to go." In Grandma Ida's spare room, the air smelled of mothballs and something subtly comforting. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, scattering reflections across the furniture we were moving. Gripping the edge of an old dresser, I heaved it with effort. The floorboards groaned under its weight. Ida stood in the doorway, watching me. "We could hire someone to do this," she offered. "No," I shook my head. "I need to do it myself." Every piece of furniture I shifted seemed to give back a part of myself I'd lost in the tangle of family expectations. My arms ached, but there was a strange sweetness in the pain, a feeling of my own strength. "I have plans for this space," I said, wiping my forehead. Ida smiled softly, just the corners of her mouth lifting. "Your mother called again this morning." I froze for a moment, then returned to work, focusing on the scrape of wood against wood. "What did she want?" To remind me that you're being unreasonable and that family should stick together, Ida replied with a faint chuckle. I told her that's exactly why you're here. I wanted to respond, but my phone buzzed with a message from Theo's gallery. Opening tonight. There are some people you need to meet. Don't miss it. Well, there's some good news, Ida remarked. Maybe there's something permanent for you at Theo's gallery? Before I could answer, voices drifted in from the driveway. Familiar voices. Ida moved to the window, her face clouded with a shadow of concern. Well, that's unexpected. I followed her gaze, my stomach tightening into a knot as I spotted Livia's red convertible. She stepped out, sliding her designer sunglasses onto the top of her head. Dax followed her, dressed in a flawlessly tailored suit, looking like he'd just stepped off the cover of a magazine. I'll handle this, Ida said. No, let me, I stopped her. Straightening my paint-stained t-shirt, I walked to the door. This time, I would deal with Livia myself. The boldness of it struck me like a blow to the chest. They had stolen my future, trampled it, and now they were here, offering to sell it back to me in pieces. It was almost laughable in its brazen audacity. I looked at Livia, forcing my voice to remain steady. That's generous, I said carefully, but I already have a job and a mentor. Oh yes, the gallery, Livia drawled, stretching the word mockingly, her condescending tone making my fists itch. Sweet little Calla, playing assistant to a washed-up artist. That's not a career. Theo Lang is done, she added with feigned concern. He's about to lose his gallery. My heart clenched painfully. Theo hadn't mentioned anything about that to me. It couldn't be true. You're lying, I hissed through gritted teeth. This time, Dax spoke. His voice was smooth, like someone selling luxury champagne, but every word cut deep. Through our connections in real estate, we learned the building is already on the market. My chest tightened with a mix of hurt and indignation. I didn't want to believe a single word they said, but fear slithered into my heart. We just want to help you, Calla, Livia's voice softened, almost sincere. You could come back home, be part of something real. I stared at her flawless makeup, her confident smile honed as sharp as a weapon. And this time, I saw something I'd never noticed before, fear. Livia was scared. Something about this boutique wasn't right, and that thought stoked the fire of my anger. I'm already part of something real, I said, meeting Livia's gaze with unwavering intensity. And I think it's time for you to leave. Theo's gallery was dark when I arrived. The light in the backyard glowed dimly, his car parked beneath the awning. Through the window, I saw Theo hunched over a table, surrounded by a chaotic pile of papers. My heart quickened. What if Dax had been telling the truth? The door clicked open under my touch, and I stepped inside. You're getting careless, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Theo's head jerked up. Papers scattered to the floor. Calla, you should have called, he muttered, pushing back his chair. Were you going to tell me about the gallery being sold? I stood firm, staring him down. A shadow of guilt flickered across his face. He ran a hand through his hair, searching for the right words. It's true. The owner is selling the building to developers. They're planning to turn the block into luxury apartments. I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Papers lay strewn across the table. I picked one up, a bank statement covered in red numbers. Is that why you canceled my last lessons? I asked, my voice trembling. Theo looked tired, as if years had suddenly piled onto his shoulders. I should have told you sooner. But there's more you need to know. He handed me his phone. On the screen was a social media post, Livia, standing with a champagne glass in front of a storefront. The caption read, "Thanks to our amazing investors, I can't wait to transform this historic space into something spectacular. Emerson Boutique." My eyes locked onto the address. It was Theo's gallery. She knew, I whispered. When they came today, they already knew. Theo handed me another document. My father's signature was scrawled at the bottom, confirming his full backing of Livia's boutique investment. "They're not just taking my college fund," I whispered, feeling the paper crumple in my fist. "They're taking everything." "Not everything," Theo said gently. He rose and walked to the covered canvas in the corner of the room. "Think about the piece you were working on. The one about family ties." He pulled the cloth away, revealing my unfinished painting. Golden chains, woven into a complex tangle, were breaking in several places. Some links gleamed brightly, as if new, others were dull and rusted. "Finish it," he said, looking at me with the same confidence that had always kept me believing in myself. "The gallery's last show before it closes will be important. Make it matter. Investors will be there, the city's elite. Including your family." I stared at the painting, and an idea began to form in my mind. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Ida. "Found something. We need to talk. Come home when you can." "I have to go," I said, heading for the door. "But Theo, thank you for telling me the truth." "Calla," his voice stopped me at the threshold. "Whatever you're planning, remember, revenge and justice aren't the same." I nodded, but his words lingered, like the echo of something deeply significant. I thought about the fear in Livia's eyes, my father's signature on the investment documents, the way they'd always dismissed my art as worthless while plotting to destroy the one place that believed in me. Maybe this wasn't just about me. The drive back to Ida's passed in a blur. She was waiting for me in her study, surrounded by old folders and photographs. Without preamble, she handed me a yellow newspaper clipping. "Read this." The headline screamed, "Local business empire built on stolen art." I froze, scanning the lines about the Monroe Gallery. "It was your grandfather's gallery," Ida said, watching my reaction. "Before your father married into the family and merged the businesses. He was a stern but fair man. Until certain pieces from the collection went missing." "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked, my voice weaker than I intended. "Because history has a way of repeating itself," Ida replied softly. She handed me another folder. "It's time you understood who you're dealing with." I opened the folder, and the scattered puzzle pieces of the past began to come together. Livia's boutique, the gallery's sale, my father's desperate need to maintain the illusion of success. It wasn't just about my future. It was about something that had been building for decades. I knew what my next painting would be. Ida's cough started early in the morning, a slight tickle in her throat. By noon, she was gasping between words, her face pale against the hospital pillows. I clutched the medical files, still warm from the printer, while the doctors whispered by the door. "You should call your mother," Ida rasped. "I'm not calling anyone," I replied, adjusting her pillows and avoiding her piercing gaze. "I need to finish the painting for Theo's final exhibition." Ida grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Some things are more important than revenge, Calla," she whispered. A nurse arrived with medication, and I stepped out into the hallway to take a call. "Where are you?" Theo's voice was tense. "The collectors are already here." "I can't come," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Ida's in the hospital." The silence on the line stretched uncomfortably long. "Is she okay?" Theo finally asked, his tone softening. "They're running tests." I pressed my forehead against the cool windowpane, trying to ease the throbbing pressure in my temples. "I'll work on the piece tonight. I promise." "Forget the piece," he said firmly but kindly. "Take care of your grandmother." I was about to say goodbye, but his next words struck me like a sudden blow. "Calla, Dax was here." He was asking questions about the old Monroe Gallery's records. My stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. But he seemed very interested in the origins of certain pieces, especially the ones that disappeared after your father took over." I thought of the newspaper clipping Ida had shown me. It felt heavy in my pocket, like a burning stone. "I have to go," I said, hanging up, but before I could take a step, I heard my mother's voice echoing down the corridor. Where is she? Where's my mother? Mom entered Ida's room, clutching a designer handbag. She looked anxious and a little unsteady, but froze when she saw me. You didn't tell us anything, she accused. Funny how that feels, isn't it? Ida interjected, her raspy voice cracking between us like a whip. Not now. Mom approached the bed, her flawless makeup smudged, as if from tears. The doctor said it's pneumonia. Why didn't you call us sooner? Because I'm handling it, I replied, though even to me, my words felt hollow. Like you're handling everything else? Mom laughed bitterly. Your father had to hear about your special piece for Theo's show from his investors. They're concerned about negative publicity. And they should be, I shot back. I asked Dad about the pieces that disappeared from the Monroe Gallery. Mom went pale. You don't understand what you're talking about, she whispered, but her voice wavered. I understand enough, I said, heading for the door. Calla, wait. Mom called after me, but I was already running down the sterile hallways, my head spinning with thoughts. The drive to my makeshift studio blurred past. I flipped on the light and approached the canvas. The golden chains in the painting now looked like serpents, wrapping around memories and setting them ablaze. My phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. Smart girl, digging into the past. Want to know more? D. Dax. Of course, he wouldn't miss an opportunity. I wanted to delete the message but hesitated. Sometimes, fire really does have to be fought with fire. I replied with a single word. Where? The booth in the diner smelled of overused grease, its worn upholstery clashing with Dax's impeccable suit. He sat there, out of place, absent-mindedly moving a chipped coffee cup across the table. In front of him lay a manila envelope. Everything you need to know about the Monroe Gallery scandal, he said, gesturing toward the envelope before I could sit down. Including what your father did with your grandfather's collection. I glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. Why are you helping me? His smile was cold, never reaching his eyes. Let's just say Livia isn't the only one in your family with investment problems. He leaned back, as if that explained everything. The boutique is losing money even before it opens. Your father is desperately trying to leverage anything he can, including items that technically don't belong to him. Stolen artwork? I clarified. Borrowed, Dax corrected smoothly. Though the original owners might disagree. At that moment, my phone buzzed. A message from Mom, Ida's asking for you. Please come back. What do you want in return? I asked, ignoring the worry gnawing at me from the message. When it's all over, I want it to be clear that I was the one who helped expose the truth. His voice softened, though it remained just as cold. And I want my investment back. How much? 200,000. The figure hit me like a physical blow. It was more than my college fund. More than I could even imagine. Another message from Mom lit up my screen. Her fever's worse. She needs you here. I have to go, I said, standing. I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight as though it contained stones instead of papers. This doesn't make us allies, I added. Of course not, he agreed, his smile widening. How's your dear grandmother doing? I hear she's not well. His voice carried a veiled threat, subtle but unmistakable. I turned and walked away without replying. At the hospital, I found Theo outside Ida's room. He looked exhausted, his face shadowed with worry. What are you doing here? He asked. Mom called me, I said curtly. He nodded toward the door. She's been asking for you. Talking about some paintings in the attic. What paintings? He caught my arm as I started toward the room. Whatever you're planning with Dax, be careful. He's not on your side. No one is. I didn't respond, stepping inside. Ida was propped up on pillows, looking smaller and weaker than ever. Mom sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. There she is, Ida whispered. My Calla. I stepped closer, taking her other hand. Her fingers were cold. I'm sorry I kept the paintings, she murmured. They're in the attic, behind a false wall. Mom's head snapped up. Behind what wall? Your father's treasures, Ida said softly, her eyes locking with mine. The ones he couldn't sell. I kept them safe all these years. Mom gasped, but I already knew. The missing pieces from the Monroe Gallery. The ones my father had claimed he sold to pay off debts. Show them, Ida said, her voice growing weaker. Show everyone the truth. But remember, truth without compassion is just another weapon. Her monitors began to beep faster. Mom jumped up to call the nurses, while I stood frozen, the weight of Ida's words sinking into me. The gallery buzzed with the sounds of the premiere. Champagne glasses clinked, laughter and animated conversation filled the air. Seattle's elite had gathered in all their glittering splendor to witness Theo's final show, perhaps unaware that this wasn't just an exhibition, it was a quiet war simmering beneath the surface. My paintings hummed like predators, their shadows stretching across the walls. At the center of the room, hidden beneath a white sheet, was my main canvas, a massive piece that had consumed my life over the past week. Theo stood at the far end of the room, casting me worried glances but staying out of my way. He understood that tonight was my battle to fight. Dax appeared beside me, as if from nowhere. His smile was soft, almost affectionate, but his eyes gleamed with menace. He raised a glass of champagne and leaned in closer. Shame about Ida, he said, his voice like a serpent's hiss. The doctors say she might not make it through the night. My fingers tightened around my glass of water, but I held back the retort burning on my tongue. You're just talking, I finally managed. Talking, he agreed, nodding toward the entrance. Looks like your whole family is here. I turned and saw them, Mom, Dad, and Livia. They walked in together, a united front, perfectly choreographed to project strength and unity. Livia stood between them like a living shield. Their polished appearances, practiced smiles, and carefully measured movements were designed to remind everyone of the standard our family was meant to embody. My gaze locked on my father's face. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the canvas hidden beneath the sheet. Last chance, Dax whispered, his voice dripping with venom. Walk away now, and I'll make sure you get a cut of the boutique's profits. The boutique that's already failing? I shot him a cold look. His smile faltered, turning cautious, almost strained. Careful, Calla, he warned before disappearing into the crowd. Some paintings are better left in the attic. Theo stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice commanding the attention of the entire room, welcome to our final exhibition. Tonight, we are proud to showcase the work of our youngest and most talented artist. My phone buzzed in my pocket, either a message or a call. I ignored it, letting voicemail take over. All my focus was on the canvas. And so, Theo continued, I am honored to present to you Family Legacy by Calla Emerson. I approached the canvas and yanked the sheet away. The room fell silent, followed by a collective gasp. The painting depicted the main hall of the Monroe Gallery, but distorted, as if seen through a nightmare. The once celebrated paintings that had adorned its walls were warped, their edges burning and twisting into golden chains that coiled around shadowy figures. At the center stood a silhouette, a representation of my father, pulling the chains taut. Beside him, Livia counted stacks of money that disintegrated into ash, slipping through her fingers. In the background, barely visible, were documents, forged contracts, bank statements, and records from Dax's envelope. Every detail was woven into the painting, evidence hidden in plain sight. My father stepped forward, his face pale. These paintings were sold legally. His voice was louder than he might have intended, cracking slightly under pressure. I turned to him, fury bubbling beneath my calm exterior. Or you stole them from Grandpa when he was sick. Just like you stole my future for Livia. Enough, Mom snapped, her hand gripping mine tightly. Your grandmother is dying, and this is how you choose to act, by airing the truth? I stood frozen, watching her face contort with pain, as if everything I had built had crumbled in a single moment. I removed the paintings from Ida's attic, she said evenly, her voice low and controlled. The real ones. The ones she kept safe from you. Livia pushed through the crowd, her eyes burning with hatred. You're lying, she spat, her voice shaking. Dad would never, he'd never let you betray him like this. My eyes locked with Dax's across the room. He stood at the far end, and I had felt his presence the entire time, like a shadow waiting to pounce. I clenched my teeth. Show them the investment papers. I commanded, my voice sharp. Dax, show them where the money really went. The gallery filled with whispers, as if the air itself had thickened, heavy with the weight of revelations. Livia turned to Dax, her face contorted with anger and desperation, but he was already retreating toward the exit. My phone buzzed again. I fumbled it out of my pocket, barely managing to answer. This time, the voice on the line said, Miss Emerson, you need to come. Your grandmother. The phone slipped from my fingers, and the world spun. Theo caught my arm as I nearly stumbled. It's time, he said, helping me steady myself. Ida said he'd take care of things here. I broke into a run toward the exit, but my father stepped directly in my path. You've destroyed everything, he said, his voice quieter than I had expected. Are you happy now? Over his shoulder, I saw my paintings, raw and unflinching, burning on the canvas like a reminder of all that had been shattered. Burning bridges. I knew I could never rebuild what once was. Livia was crying. Mom tried to console her, while the crowd buzzed with the energy of a boiling volcano. Dax was nowhere to be seen. I whispered, barely audible. Please. He stepped aside, but his words followed me like heavy stones. Tonight, you're no better than us. Perhaps he was right. Maybe I had misunderstood compassion. Maybe I had become exactly what they always thought I would be, just another Emerson, destroying everything I touched. The engine roared to life as I prayed to make it in time. Just to say goodbye. When I reached Ida's room, she was already lying still. Time felt like it had melted away, disappearing like snow in the sun. The room was quiet, save for the monitors, hissing faintly like birds losing their strength. Mom stood by the window, her shoulders trembling, as if the weight of the world had collapsed into this single moment. A nurse announced the time of death. All I could hear was my own heart, thudding dully, drowning out everything else. She left this for you, Mom said, handing me an envelope, her voice raw and strained. Give it to. I took it mechanically, unable to open it yet. Not until Ida. Her body was still warm, but I knew there was no returning now. The paintings I had saved. We would need to take care of Dad. Dad appeared in the doorway, and I saw how much older he looked than ever before. The police were already at the house. Dax had confessed everything. He'd admitted to embezzling money from multiple investors, using the boutique as a front. Dad laughed, but the sound was hollow, an empty echo of something long gone. We were all fools. Livia shoved past him into the room, her face streaked with tears, mascara smudged across her cheeks. Is it true about the paintings? She asked, staring at me intently. I nodded, unable to muster a single word. Why couldn't you just tell us the truth? Livia's voice twisted bitterly. Why make it so public? I looked at all of them, my family, who I once thought was perfect but now seemed shattered, like a fragile mirror in pieces. I wondered if I had whispered instead of screamed, would anyone have listened? Mom stepped toward me, but I backed away. My fingers found the edge of Ida's envelope. I tore it open. Inside was a key and a letter. Mom whispered, barely audible. Please. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. My dearest Kala. You have shown them your truth. But truth without healing is just another kind of poison. The key to the attic, This simple metal object unlocked more than a long-forgotten space. It unlocked a future. A future where I could be both strong and compassionate. Each turn of that key felt like shedding a chain that had held me captive to my family, my obligations, the lies that buried the truth. Ida had left me not only the paintings but also a choice. She had left me a chance to preserve the legacy while shaping it into something I could define on my own terms. Mom spoke quietly. The estate, the paintings, all of it. Livia. Her words broke off as Livia let out a strangled sound, rising from deep in her throat. After everything she had done tonight, after the humiliation she had brought upon us, Livia seemed to have nothing left to say. I responded. I'll fix this. There's a difference between revenge and justice. Mom stayed silent, but her eyes were full of questions, as always. She couldn't understand what I intended to do with the truth. I looked at the key in my hand and thought about Ida's words, about poison and healing, about the fine line between vengeance and justice, about what I needed to do to rebuild what had been destroyed. I lifted my head. I'm going to start an art scholarship, I said. In Ida's name. These paintings will be displayed publicly, with their full history. No more secrets. Livia stared at me, her face open, her eyes flashing with anger. You wouldn't give up your share, she whispered. I met my father's gaze, and in that moment, everything Grandpa had spoken of suddenly made sense. It had to be this way. All along, I had been in the room, shielded by a silent force that called me to action. But now, silence reigned, broken only by the distant hum of hospital machinery. Decades of secrets that had hummed like a weight over our family home came crashing down, and at last, my father spoke. I'll make it right. Livia moved to the window, her reflection fractured in the glass. Her words pierced me as they came. I never meant for Dax and the money, she said, regret lacing her voice. I just wanted to feel special. I stood there, holding Ida's key and letter, realizing this was only the beginning. The truth had broken us, but perhaps it could also restore us. This was a pivotal moment when I felt that, despite all the destruction, the future could still be built. The gallery opens in an hour, I said, with more confidence than I'd ever had. With the real paintings. Come with me. They nodded, and as we left Ida's room, we walked toward the life waiting for us, one that lay on the other side of the key. The morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the world in new shades, hues of possibility. 6 months after Ida's death, I stood in my new studio. Through the skylights we'd installed, warm light poured in, illuminating the space where her hidden paintings had once been stored. Now, those very works hung in the Monroe Emerson Gallery downtown. They were part of a true history, documented and displayed for anyone who wished to see. The door creaked, and I turned. Livia stood in the doorway, but she wasn't the same. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, no more designer outfits. Her old world was behind her. The scholarship committee is waiting, she said. The first round of applications is already in. I nodded, glancing at my latest painting. I added a final stroke, completing a portrait of Ida, surrounded by golden light, with broken chains transforming into butterflies. As for Dad, I couldn't help but notice his progress with the restoration project. He was growing more immersed in the process, absorbed by every stroke and every detail. Sometimes, I even had to remind him to clean his brush properly. The therapist said working with his hands was helping him connect, to himself, to us, and I was beginning to believe it. Like me, he was seeking healing, though his search was quieter, more deliberate. Examining each painting, he carefully catalogued every piece of Grandpa's collection, as if reconstructing not just a legacy but his own reality, one where we could live without lies. I thought about the ways I was trying to set things right. But Mom was still struggling to understand why her perfect family had been anything but. Livia's laughter had softened. It was no longer brittle, as though years of pain and isolation had left their mark. Yet, even in her voice, there was still uncertainty. We had all changed, and she seemed to be learning to be different, learning to forgive, maybe even herself. I set down my brush, reflecting on the journal I'd found among Ida's belongings last week. Its pages were filled with her struggles against family expectations, her quiet acts of rebellion, and her hope that someday the truth would heal rather than harm. We're all searching for redemption, even if it isn't always possible. The divorce papers came through Livia. She quietly mentioned that Dax wasn't contesting anything. It's hard to contest from prison. He had lost everything but could never truly give himself to us. She touched the edge of my canvas, her eyes filled with unspoken emotions. You made me look different in this, she murmured. More real. I caught her gaze in the reflection of the window and understood that, in that moment, we had finally decided to restore the scholarship committee. Time flew by. 5 young artists, chosen as the first recipients of the Ida Monroe Foundation grants, stood before us, and I could feel Mom, standing beside me, holding back tears. As we announced the winners, Dad squeezed my hand, and Theo beamed from his place on the committee. My family seemed to be coming together again, but was it true healing? Later, as the sun set over the city, I found myself back in my studio. On the table lay an unopened letter from one of the top art schools in New York. It was the school I had dreamed of attending before everything fell apart, before my dreams collided with reality. Mom stood in the doorway and said softly, "You should open it. Ida would have wanted you to." I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave anymore. I gestured to the studio, the gallery, the life we were building from the ashes of our old one. There was still so much we had done, but even more left to do. Mom picked up the letter, and I thought that sometimes, the best way to honor a legacy is to create your own. I thought of Ida's journal, of her final words on the last page. Truth is not what breaks us, it's what gives us the courage to become who we're meant to be. I opened the letter, the envelope yielding easily to my touch, as if it knew what was meant to happen. Mom waited, watching as I read it. These years finally felt real, not perfect, but real. No hidden agendas, no schemes. Just a mother and daughter holding on to something new. She whispered, "I always knew you'd fly." I pinned the acceptance letter to the memory wall, next to Ida's journal, the key to her attic, and a small sketch she had drawn of herself, a child with a paintbrush in hand. Beneath it, I hung my newest painting. A family portrait, but not like the angry one from the gallery exhibition. This painting showed us as we were now, imperfect, yet healing. The golden chains were still there, but they no longer bound us. They no longer twisted or transformed. Instead, they had become bridges, connecting who we had been to who we could become, just as Ida had always wanted.